Fantastic. So Paul and I started a really exciting series of conversations starting off this year with the theme of actually we started talking about leadership development and then realized that was nonsense. And then we talked about what it is to be human and consider that. And we've had a series of talks which have become more and more sort of open and honest on non-holes barred type basis. We've talked about the importance of faith, the importance of ethics, and a whole raft of other things, which certainly for me I found very helpful to check my own thinking in what's been a difficult time. And I thank you, Paul, for that actually as well. It's been great to compare notes. And so anyway, to wrap up 2022, we thought we'd get together and talk about what we've learned, what have been our main learnings from 2022. So Paul, over to you, my friend. Why don't you kick off?
Yeah, well, I saw an article in the FT recently, and I think they nailed everything that's going wrong at the moment in one word, which is polycrisis, which is right at the moment, I don't want to go down the whole sort of like, climate confusion thing, but it's like, if you listen to the media, there's sort of, the most important thing is what's happening with the climate, which I don't want to even go that. I mean, even if it was as serious as they're making out, it's only part of one of a number of things that are going seriously wrong at the moment.
Yeah.
We've got financial issues, we've got global security issues, we've got mental health issues, we've got cultural issues, we've got political, we've got serious, we've got issues in society which are degenerating very, very quickly into tribal issues, and that kind of stuff never goes well.
Yeah.
We've got, as a result of the economics, we've got supply chain issues. We've got increased medical issues because of people's, there's a lot of stuff going wrong at the moment at the same time. And, how do we deal with that? It's like, one of the things that I've been talking to my client base or my prospective client base for a long time is that sort of like, CEOs, to be a good CEO, you kind of have to make it up as you go along. You have to wing it, right? It's not all the time, but certainly some of the time. But I don't think it's, in some respects, not in all respects, it's never been harder to be a CEO because we've got unprecedented, unparalleled, overused words, I know, but overused because they're true, unparalleled levels of chaos, complexity, and confusion.
Yeah.
And actually, that's actually summed up in that one word, polycrisis. And it's like, how do we manage that, and how do we navigate that? And most people, it's very, very poorly, because most people just go, okay, I'm going to focus on one problem. I reckon the biggest problem is fake news, or I reckon the biggest problem is the climate, or I reckon the biggest problem is Vladimir Putin. It's almost like, as human beings, we can't focus on more than one problem at a time.
Yeah.
And right now we really need to.
Absolutely, yeah. No, that I totally agree. I think what I'd say is when things get tough, it's a classic test of leadership. When things are easy, it really isn't a test of leadership, and that's one of the traits I've become very familiar with through company turnaround. And frankly, it's very difficult to predict how people behave when things get tough. But one thing's for sure is that I've noticed in company turnaround is around the language. It's around when things get tough, the language gets out of control. And I think that's what concerns me more than anything, Paul. It's not so much the crisis, because, all we have is the present. And the question is, are we taking the right actions faced with whatever the situation is, which is the role of the CEO? What concerns me leading CEOs out of crises is that the realignment and the language is out of control. And this is very dangerous territory. And you talked a bit about, well, your approach, which I think is a great start, which is around identity and or getting the story right, whatever the right words are you use. And even at that level, the action that people are taking, which I'm really concerned about, is EDI, which is about trashing identity.
Yeah.
So that's how bad the language is. So, and actually EDI is a set of tools which look and sound attractive, but in fact are very, very deceptive, and are taking companies down a very dark path. The interesting thing about that is that whilst it's a nasty mess to undo, if you recognise and undo it, then you can leave every other idiot pursuing a EDI strategy and trashing their businesses, because it is a route to hell. And I think one thing I've noticed is that it's one thing you talked about the crisis, but I think I'm not too worried about the crisis. It's about what are people doing about it? So what are you and I doing?
True, yeah.
Because a crisis is a crisis, but the question is, how do we respond to it? And so this oddly enough is very much my comfort zone. And I think, I've been concerned about various things, and I've written books on this because the subject matter is complex, to provide people an opportunity to think it through for themselves. And there are sort of 4 themes I've come across. One is the psychology and pathology of technology, which has its own weird world. And I think it's increasingly becoming influenced by artificial intelligence. So a lot of the misalignment, I think, is coming from technology, and we're unaware of that. We've got the woke situation, which is around victimhood, which is the most unhealthy psychology. We've got menticide, which is having got trapped in this mess. The ability for us to be manipulated with ever increasing lies. And I wrote another book this year because I realised that we're actually stuck in a bubble, and under the banner of EDI, which is really around when our national identity is under threat. Our personal identity is under threat in relation to these lies around gender and sex, which are just unbelievable, and to the degree whereby the Queen is now being accused of being racist, which is by association. So this dialogue is really becoming unhealthy, and I think this actually is spilling over. So when I look at real projects I'm involved with, such as technology and zero carbon in the UK, whatever we call it, I mean, one is only less than 1% of the entire problem on the planet is in the UK, and so it isn't a reason to panic. Particularly, the problem is very much greater elsewhere. But when you look at the strategies that have been deployed, they're all over the place. Electric vehicles are going to make the carbon footprint an awful lot worse, and you've got things like crypto, which is just like some sort of short-term greed factory. So I think we've got a situation whereby we're knowingly doing stupid things and we're unable to get off it.
But there's something even deeper. There's something like there's this knowingly committed. It's like as if people are knowingly committing suicide.
Yeah. No. Well, that's right. And I think but actually when you stop people from speaking, Paul, that's actually what you're doing. Because we are what we think, and that's very much us. Us is our thoughts, and do people value our thoughts? And it's actually, I think it was Plato or one of those sorts of smart asses all those years ago. They did actually talk about, if you take language away from or manipulate language, you're actually killing people, you're actually committing suicide. So really is. The other thing I noticed is the word abomination. Because this
I love that word.
Around pride, and Jesus described the pride as being an abomination. I looked up the word abomination, which I think reflects actually the way I feel about these things around companies absorbed in EDI, companies absorbed in technology, taking on artificial intelligence, these obsessive strategies around crypto, etc., all that sort of stuff, and the weirdness of electric vehicles, is that abomination actually is a feeling of loathing and disgust, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually the way I feel about these things, to the point whereby I'm just not willing to get involved in them. Individually, I just can't. I don't mind sorting it out. And so I think the other question is, how the hell, we talked about the crisis, but how the hell do we rationalize, Paul, what's right or wrong? Because if you take crypto, for example, I've got some really good mates of mine who think crypto is a great idea. And as a Christian, I can give people grace and love and accept that I may be wrong and they may be right or whatever, and accept we may have different view. But actually, I've noticed that what a successful outcome looks like is extraordinarily different. And I don't, it's so all over the place. It's difficult to know how to rationalize it or how to.
Well, I think, one hard and fast rule you could apply is whether something like crypto is a salvation issue. So does a Christian want to be involved in a crypto company? Does someone want to set up, someone might with the best of intentions want to set up Christ coin, for example. Is it a salvation issue? I don't think it is, in the way that, a Christian can't set up, a pornography company.
Yeah.
Or run a nightclub or bring out sex toys. Yeah. So I think whether what you're doing is a barrier to salvation or not.
Well, yeah, I was thinking more in terms of what do we do? So faced with the crisis, what are the actions we take? So I've been involved in a board this year, a very successful company. We started it's projected to be worth billions of dollars. And one of the questions we had was around blockchain and establishing that for carbon credits. And there's a whole world around that, which I didn't know, which is actually very misleading. It looks okay, but actually it isn't. And I think it certainly flagged up my moral compass. It tweaked my moral compass. It wasn't a salvation issue per se, but ethically, it's going to quite a sinister sort of place, this sort of stuff. And I think there's something about, knowingly doing things that are wrong. And actually, I'm not saying my moral compass is the right moral compass, of course, it's just my moral compass. But, if you and I both, have a view, and it's relatively straightforward if we're Christians, I think, to resolve this sort of stuff, to be honest. But I think when don't have that platform, I think it's extraordinarily difficult to try and rationalize it.
Absolutely. How do you navigate it? I mean, how do you, because then there is no such thing as morality. It's just a matter of opinion.
Yeah, and it's self-defined opinion, and quite interesting. So, yeah, I think something's happened. Have you got an echo on?
A little bit, nothing too bad.
Okay. So I think those are the sorts of topics that concern me, Paul, around faced with a challenge. How do we decide what's right or wrong? I'm not particularly. I love a challenge anyway. So no matter how difficult it gets, I sort of get more and more interested in that. It fires me up. I think that it's the dialogue, it's the actions that have been taken en masse that are not dissimilar to the rise of the Nazi Party, where there's a.
I agree.
After the First World War, the Germans' pride was shot to pieces as a nation, and some idiots like Hitler popped up with all kinds of persuasive, charismatic dialogue, which was utterly evil, and it grabbed hold of the nation, and it was all very much around, centered around victimhood. It was around, victim scapegoat and terror. And look what happened. And I think, to be honest, we're on a few different fronts actually. And I think, to be honest, probably the worst thing you can do to anybody is to silence them. It's a form of killing somebody. It's killing themselves, or the essence of themselves, or their soul, or it's a very deep thing. And I think that's what we're facing. So I think we're facing really quite a nasty situation at the moment that certainly I'm not willing to go along with. And I think we do have a responsibility to say no. And I think that the toughest thing ever to do in business is to stop doing things. It's unbelievably difficult to stop doing things. And I think there's,
yeah,
Those that do are going to do very well, but those that don't, I think, are really heading for a nasty place.
Well, wasn't it, funnily enough, it was, this will annoy you, because wasn't it actually a crypto company, Coinbase, that decided they were going to sort of like clean the septic tank and purge woke? And then just said, listen, we're not going to deal with any of this crap anymore. If you don't like it, fuck off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the sort of conversation you can engage with. The question is crypto part of a solution? And that's an interesting debate. So if you look at some of the psychology of that, it is around, it's quite sinister actually, because it's not around what society has ever been successfully based upon. So for a start, it certainly doesn't have any faith-based roots. It's all about individuality. It's all about looking after yourself. It's about, and if it actually leads to a rather horrible form of social scoring, which actually leads to exactly the opposite outcome. So that is absolutely the sort of most tyrannical woke outcome you could imagine. So these people are talking about libertarianism, and they tend to be very technical people who, frankly, I don't think have got much breadth of thinking. They're not what I described.
I mean, I actually think that's one of the scary things about tech. It's like people are great in one area, and because I've done this in my own life. It's like I thought because I was good at advertising and good at coming up with ideas, I thought that made me brilliant in all areas of my life. And until I ended up in an AA meeting at age 46, like completely devastated. And I think tech's like that. People sort of, I think they a lot of the time they lack common sense, and definitely any moral sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is, it's like we just have I was listening to one of my favorite female apologists, Alyssa Childers, this morning. She said, it's crazy. She said, when my father became a Christian in the 60s, it's like, now people may not have necessarily wanted to stop sinning, but they knew they were sinning, right? Yeah. They knew they needed redemption. It's like now, she goes, the biggest barrier to sharing the gospel is getting to try to get people to understand that what they're doing is wrong.
Yeah, I know.
So they just don't get it.
I know.
It's okay to have sex with 6 guys a night. It's okay. It's like, hello.
I know. I mean, it's really quite disturbing. I agree totally. And I think that's part of the menticide. It's around normalizing things and then people stepping out into taking these actions, and it actually becomes reality, Paul. This is actually becoming reality. So this dialogue around, that awful advert, whatever it's called, with a sort of child porn in the background, this is actually materializing, and it's really quite disturbing. I mean, specifically, there's a guy I know locally who's gone to prison for that sort of stuff, and he started off as being quite a reasonable bloke not so long ago. And it really is quite disturbing. And I think I don't know how. Well, I'm seriously concerned. I think it's not going to end well. Defining your own purpose, even at the most elementary level, is diabolical. You'll never do it. Ideology leads to tyranny because it's imperfect. I mean, the basic Christian crux of the way we operate, which is grace and love, is to have an interest in other people first and foremost, and be able to forgive. And those two things just do not fit with ideology, Paul. Ideology is not a forgiving type of environment. It's black and white. There's no dialogue. And actually, more worrying, if it doesn't work, rather than stop and take a step back, what the idealists or the ideologists, whatever we're called, will do is actually accelerate rather than take the foot off the gas. Which is
they double down every single time.
Yeah, which is just really concerning. So I think I'm quietly confident, Paul, because all I can do is do what I think is right. Faced with what I'm faced with, and frankly, keep myself and my ethics and my connection with God as close as possible to check my own thinking. and also to speak to as many different people I disagree with as possible. But I do notice as well that because these things are becoming a bit bipolar, it's very easy for communicate, our ability to communicate to almost break down.
What do you mean by that?
What's that, sorry?
What do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that?
Things are becoming bipolar?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
if you take I talked about crypto, Paul. So if we talk about crypto, Brexit, Trump, any of these subjects, rather than actually talk about what matters and what other people think and where they're coming from and having a rational discussion, it's very much bipolar. You're either a Trump fan or you're a crypto fan, or and you.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
And I think and I know for a fact that a good mate of mine talks about the need to have a huge marketing budget with crypto, and the reason for that is you need to dupe the audience. Simple as that. And the only people that buy crypto are the people who fall for the crypto ideology, and it is an ideology, some of which you touched on around, creating independence of the state and all this sort of bigger picture stuff and nation without borders and all this sort of weird thinking, which is simply not true. And people find that quite attractive. And I think the problem is if people will believe anything. Now, I think one of the big problems, if you look at the population, is that most people will believe anything. And if you corrupt the CEO, which they are, because they cannot. I've got a meeting in about 10 minutes with a board member of BP, who's a very impressive individual, and he talked about the need simply to do the right thing, Paul. And he's one of the few chief exec chairs of PLC boards who actually knows what good looks like. I think, you've got, a lot of the chief execs of KPMG have stood up and said what they thought was right against this prevailing ideological wisdom, who have got fired, for doing the right thing, like saying, get on with your work, or stop, just speaking common sense. And it's really very troubling, because if you corrupt the CEO, and I think they are corrupted, then you're in a very dark place. And, so who actually is going to steer the ship in the right direction if the chief exec is scared of their HR director, and they're scared of taking any action at all, and fear drives people backwards, and it's just so.
Well, fear will just bring out the worst version of you, the worst.
Yeah. Absolutely. It also drives you backwards as well, because what it does is it causes you psychologically to want to revert back to normal, or whatever that was before. But actually you don't want to go back. Nobody really actually wants to go back to that anyway. So that's a bit of a weird anomaly. So let's just have a go at wrapping this up, Paul. So if there's one thing that people should do, let's try and keep it as simple as possible. One thing that people who've been so kind to listen to this discussion for this length of time, what's the one thing, whilst I hate offering advice, that we have found from 2022 to contribute to this solution?
Go to church.
Yeah.
Seriously,
Yeah.
It's probably the biggest thing you can do for not only your mental health, but also sort of like, if you, it's been proven, the religious people, I mean, if I wanted to, I bias, so I'd say go to church. I could just easily say go to the synagogue, go to the mosque. It's not as if sort of like Christians have got a monopoly on good mental health through religion. I think that's been shown across the board.
Yeah.
But basically what happens is, what's the worst thing, a lot of these fears come from a fear of death, okay? And this is why eschatology is so important, because I was just listening to, actually, I sent it to you, a great interview between a Delta guy who was converted to Christ independently just before he started running combat missions on the Afghan-Pakistan border with Delta. And, he was the most courageous guy out of his unit, because he didn't fear death.
Yeah.
He was like, okay, well, I'm going to end up with my savior. So You know, it's not just going to church, you're around lots of nice people who make delicious, you know, salmon and cucumber sandwiches. It's just, it will help you realize what's important in this life, what morals you should follow. And then in this atmosphere of polycrisis, whether you're wondering about sort of like starving to death because your pension fund will dry up, or whether you think that Vladimir Putin is going to sort of like bomb you out of, you know, existence, or whether you just won't fear that much because
I think you're right, Paul. I think you're absolutely right.
It won't be that bad. I mean, it's just, it's like if, you know, if somehow you could invent religion right now, it would outsell anything, because it is actually the one thing that everyone's looking for. But, you know, I'm just going to end on this. It's like, I love the churches here in Liverpool. I've been going to 3 different churches. I've been telling everyone that I've been meeting about that. I've been here for like 3 months. I finally got one person to go to church on Friday night. Lady, producer, and her head was blown. I mean, it was a great service, but it was nothing unusual. It was deliverance. Pastor was just doing what he normally does. And she's like, oh, wow, this is, I'm like, yes. You know, it's like, yeah, of course, it'll change your life.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Paul. What I would add is, I think there's 2 things, actually. I'll break my own rule as usual. I think if people feel that something is wrong, don't do it at a very simple level. And I think so, and I think I think people do know that they're doing wrong things at the moment, and they just carry on doing it, which is a bit like the 1930s when Hitler came to power. I think from the God perspective, I totally agree. And I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody, when my wife and I used to go to our local church and we get invited to the embarrassing coffee afterwards, we'd run a mile, Paul. But actually, what I've learned from a practical perspective is that self-reliance is a killer, and it's utterly unrealistic. And you know, to look after our spiritual well-being is absolutely critical, and even to think that we know the answers is absurd. And what's more absurd is that, you know, Jesus changed the date that we all operate. He actually set the date, and for somebody to be so profound and not take an active interest in what that person thought and did is just unbelievable. And I think one of the disturbing things about this woke stuff is it is anti-Christ. And I'll give you a really practical example, Paul. I'll give you a real example of pride, extreme pride. The Bible actually says, right, and I picked this up recently, that is take sustainability, that it's our responsibility to look after this planet. Okay, so if you chuck your waste paper, your plastic bag out the window, Paul, or whatever, or drop your cigarette packet in the street, pick the bloody thing up and chuck it in the bin. And then the Bible actually goes on to say, in terms of fixing the planet, right, that is actually God's job, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if it could be a bit warm,
and that's about. But that's just bear with me for a second. But the reason why I'm saying that is because we are stepping into that world thinking that we are God.
Of course, it's insane. I mean, I think it's insane, but people just think, yeah, no, I listen, I hear you, but you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Right, and how do you think you're going to do that? You couldn't even manage a bad case of flu.
I know, exactly.
Wrecking the world's global economy.
Yeah, so how on earth is that going to take? So therefore, I think we've got a lot of stupid things going on, Paul, because we think we can step into the place of God. And I think that's the sort of territory we're entering in terms of wokeness, in terms of climate change. And actually all the answers in the Bible. The way we should operate with each other is in the Bible. I don't think personally that Islam is the answer. I don't think that Hinduism is the answer. Practically, that I've tested what's in the Bible around grace and love from a very practical perspective, not a religious perspective, from a practical faith-based perspective. And quite frankly, I wouldn't have the strength to cycle. I wouldn't have the strength to have this conversation with you, Paul. I wouldn't have the strength to turn a business around. I wouldn't have the strength to say to people what I feel is right or wrong without my faith. Simple as that. So
sure.
People think they can do it by themselves. Good luck. But I agree. I think
and that's why they're killing themselves. That's why.
Yeah, I agree.
That's why all the mental stress is about, and my little trainer said it the other day. She said, "You're in control of your own destiny." I go, "No, you're not. You think?"
No.
I go, "That's you've just been fed that lie."
Yeah.
Do you have a lot to do with it? Sure, you have a lot to do with it, but the person that's in control is God, right?
Yeah. We have no control. We have no control over what's going to happen tomorrow. And we have no option whether we like it or not. And this will become more and more apparent what the tougher things get. And I think we've had it very easy for a very long time, but I think this becomes very apparent the tougher things get, that actually self-reliance falls to pieces. And I thank the ridiculous experiences I've had company turnaround, Paul, because I can say with confidence, right? And I say on MBA programs when I'm talking about company turnaround, I talk about grace and love from a practical perspective, because unless you can put the past behind you, Paul, which is grace, unless you can put love people and forgive people, you will not move forwards. You'll be trapped in the past.
Yeah.
And this is very practical. So I'm not talking from some flammy perspective. I'm talking practically. So, and I think we're heading for a really difficult situation. So I really do hope and pray, frankly, that maybe one or two people that might be listening to this might, take on board, find a decent church. And there are some really bad ones around. Have a look around. And get involved. So
but I think, I'd just like to reiterate, I think one of the best pieces of advice that I got from you was from Mark Driscoll, and he said, is this a bad time for the culture? It is. Is this a bad time for the country? It is. Is this a bad time for the economy? It is. It is not a bad time for God's people who are doing the things God wants them to do.
Yeah.
And so if we do that, and if we work, if that's what we do for ourselves, and if those are the people that we choose to work with, we'll do great.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's absolutely. And it's such a relief to get your head into that place. The alternative is sinister. It's more crypto. It's more this crap we're talking about, more this ideology. It's a road to hell.
Yeah. It's an accelerated
road to hell. And I think Christianity is actually the crux of we take for granted. And Jordan Peterson talks about this. We take this for granted. And this is falling to pieces, that when we historically have engaged with each other, I think probably 2 or 3 years ago, it's pretty much true generally that we would have conversations, we'd take an active interest in each other, we might adjust, but we'd forgive and we'd find a way of working with each other. I think what's happened over these last couple of years, which is tragic, is the extreme of ideology coming into this, and everything's become good and evil. Good, and actually the evil is actually good, and the good is evil. So it's
there's something
deceptive
about that. You shall call in the end times, evil shall be seen as good, and good shall be seen as evil. And we're totally there.
Yeah, I know, I agree. Paul, my friend, I've got to go. It's been an absolute pleasure. We'll catch up later, have a chat later in the week. Have a great
brother. Take care. God bless you.
God bless you, man.